Good afternoon and welcome to today's Made by McGill Alumni webcast. My name is Derek Kassoff, Managing Director of Communications at McGill's Office of University Advancement, and it's Wednesday, January 25th, 2023. Throughout its long and illustrious history, McGill University has been home to thousands of intellectual achievements, producing to date 5 astronauts, 12 Nobel laureates, nearly 150 Rhodes Scholars, and once every few years, a Jeopardy champion. In case you missed it, Vince Bacani, a risk manager from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, made his Jeopardy debut last Tuesday, dethroning the show's defending champion and walking away with $13,000 in winnings. His run came to an end the following evening when he lost a close battle that wasn't decided until Final Jeopardy. But he returned home as a conquering hero, and we are delighted that he's made the time to join us today to tell us about his experience and maybe share a few tips with us on what it takes to become a Jeopardy champion. Welcome, Vince. It's an absolute pleasure to speak with you today.
Oh, thank you so much, Derek, for having me. Boy, that list is quite impressive. I was just thinking, which of these things is not like the other? Getting the form of a question.
Well, we could ask you to name the 5 astronauts, but we won't. But before we get started, I did want to just mention a note for our live audience that if you are watching us live now and have any questions for Vince, you can send them to us by email at aoc@mcgill.ca, and we'll do our best to put them to our guest, though I can't promise I'll answer them in the form of a question. So Vince, before we go too deep into our conversation, let's clear up a couple of points that have come out of your televised appearances last week. First off, lots of people want to know, and this hasn't really been publicized, which part of Montreal are you from?
I've been in Brossard for most of my life, but I was originally born in Montreal.
Okay, great. And another issue, just to clarify, I know on your first appearance on Jeopardy last week, you shared the story about how you play the pipe organ in a choir based in Ganawagi, a native community on Montreal's South Shore, which has led to speculation about your native origins. So let's clear that up. You're not Indigenous, but you do play the pipe organ in a choir in Ganawagi, correct?
That's correct. I'm actually a Filipino by heritage. Actually, a lot of the First Nations people contacted me, spoke to me in their native language, assuming that I was. And I had to say, regrettably, no, I'm not Aboriginal myself.
All right. Well, you could still be the pride of Ganawagi from Brossard. Close enough. So let's get into the conversation and get to some of the questions I know that everybody wants to know. And let's start at the beginning. So when did you first begin the process of auditioning to be a contestant on Jeopardy? And can you tell us what were the steps and how long did the whole thing take you?
Well, as maybe most Jeopardy fans know, in Canada, it wasn't open to apply to Jeopardy until 2014 for a short window, and then again in 2016. So since 2016, I've been applying every year. And this last process I started 3 years ago. Do I go on about the process?
Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah.
So it starts right now with an online test, the one they advertise during the show on TV. So you can take it anytime independently. It's 50 questions, and they don't tell you, they don't share the answers, they don't tell you your score. But apparently the threshold is somewhere between 70 and 80. Assuming you pass that threshold, you're put into a pool. Now at that point, it's randomized and you're all equal. So it doesn't matter if you scored 70 or 100, you're all the same at that point. And then they pick the next round, which is basically a verification test, pretty much the same thing, but with a webcam on you, just to make sure you're not cheating. And then again, back into a randomized pool. Again, they don't share results or scores, but in the randomized pool, the next stage, if you're called, is an audition. And then nowadays with COVID, it's a Zoom audition. Back in the day, you would actually have to get yourself to a US studio, but I think they're going to stick with Zoom just because it's cheaper. So during that audition, you play a mock game, maybe 10 minutes, including an interview segment, just like you see on TV. And it's not so much about the difficulty about the game playing, because the questions are easy and the moderator will move it around. It really is an audition, like a job audition. You're testing how well you speak, how you present on camera, can you tell an interesting story? So then again, you're not told of your results if you've made it or not, but you're put into another pool, not random this time, and they guarantee that you'll stay in that pool for 18 months. So after that, if you get called, then you go to this studio. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention about that online test, for anyone who's interested in taking it, you can only take one per year. So if you're going to take it, you have to be prepared. Don't take it on a whim. You actually take it when you're really feeling good and you have actually done some preparation.
Okay. And that online test, there's a time limit, I assume, right? It's not like an open book test when you've got Google next to you.
Correct. It is timed. I think it's 20 seconds per question. So it's just coming bang, bang, bang. You have to type in your answers. They let you not say like what is, just type the answer. But it's pretty fast. Technically, though, if you wanted to cheat, you probably could. There is enough time. At least you could have a person next to you. They're not watching you. But it's not going to help because the verification test will get you.
Okay. So I do want to speak to you next about sort of what happens after you got accepted. But let me just backtrack. So just to understand a bit more about you and your background, I know you one of those, what we refer to as like a hardcore trivia buff. Like, in other words, if we're playing Trivial Pursuit or we're hanging out at a pub on trivia night, do I want you on my team?
Probably not. I've never played competitive trivia before. I wasn't on Reach for the Top. I've never done pub trivia. I always say pubs are for one thing and it's not trivia. So I'm kind of the exception, though. I would say I would recommend for people interested in going on the show, yes, play pub trivia, join some kind of league. There are a lot of online leagues, learning league, quiz bowls in the US. Definitely get some experience of the actual quizzing process.
Wow. Well, so now let's jump ahead to the application. So now the application process is over. You were put in this pool. You were randomly chosen. You get a call, or maybe it was an email that says you've been selected to appear on the show. But what was your first reaction, and who was the next person after you to find out?
Everything happened by text.
Okay.
I didn't actually talk to anybody until I got to LA. My dad was the first person to know, so I said, I can't believe it, like this. So I was kind of screaming and jumping up and down. And there are certain friends that know all too well about this journey, so I called them next. But you can't tell too many people because it is on the down low.
So how long or how much time did you have between when you got that text telling you that you've been selected to when you actually knew you were going to be on the show? Like, so how much time did you have to prepare for this appearance?
It was less than a month. They asked me what dates were open, but when I said I was kind of open-ended, they said, "Oh, good, come in a month." I remember that because all the plane tickets were actually kind of expensive. And I'd given up because this was at the 19-month point, so that pool period was over. I thought I had to restart everything.
And yet they selected you even at that point. So then you have a month. So now you know you're going to Los Angeles in a month. How much studying or additional studying or preparation did you do at that point, and where did you even begin that process?
Well, even to start for the online test, you're doing some preparation. But yes, it gets more intense once you get the call for the audition, certainly. So I reviewed the things I already had. In my case, I'm relatively weak in history. So my focus was on world and especially US history. My method is dummies books, history for dummies. I have, I think, 5 of them on the shelf. And I just went through them. And some things you just have to memorize. They're not, a reflex for Canadians, but some things are. So I focused on my weak points.
Right. And what were your strong points? What did you not have to worry so much about?
Well, thanks to McGill, I was pretty competent in science and engineering. In my hobbies, movies and TV and literature, those are pretty solid. So I really did concentrate on American things.
Right. And I guess having watched the show, most of your life, I guess you had a certain familiarity with not only the kinds of topics that might come up, but also the way the questions are phrased. That must be very helpful as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, because yes, the number one tip is to be a fan of this show. You really have to watch it, tape it, and true, it's about how they ask the questions as much as what's in the question itself. It's often worded in kind of a vague way, and you don't even know what they're asking for. So you have to be quick to decipher that. And that only comes with practice. And yes, it does point you in which direction to study.
Now, you mentioned US history, and I know one of the criticisms of the show, at least from a Canadian perspective, is that there's often an overabundance of questions about American topics, particularly U.S. politics, geography, and history. And I think, in fact, in both of your appearances, the final Jeopardy categories that you had to deal with both ended up being very much U.S. centric. So was that a particular bias you considered and perhaps worried about as you prepared for your appearance?
Oh, definitely. That's the bar that they set for Canadians. If you don't clear it, forget it. Even if there weren't so many US categories on a given show, all the steps to get there include a lot of American content. And it's not just history and geography, but anything that, let's say, you would take for granted as a Canadian. Like, we understand hockey and curling. Well, for them, it's college football. It's what are the university team names? What are the newspapers in certain cities? We take it for granted as locals, but you have to consider yourself as a local American.
Right. All right. So did you do anything else to mentally or physically prepare for the show? Because I've read stories about contestants who will watch episodes with a ballpoint pen in their hand and practice, clicking on the pen like it's a buzzer as the show is playing. Did you get into any of that level of preparation?
Yes, after the audition, they told us how to prepare. So I have my high-tech prop here. So what I recommend for people to watch a show who are really serious about getting onto the show, maybe watch it once for fun or watch it after for fun. But while you're playing, so as soon as the host is finished saying the question, you start clicking, and don't stop clicking, because sometimes the buzzer will lock you out. So in case it unlocks you, you're still clicking until you get called. And the other thing I would say is practice filtering out your answers, or you're calling out the questions. We all scream at the TV. I've done it all my life, but don't you often find yourself screaming the wrong answer first? If you do that on the show, you're out. So learn to filter in your mind and say what you think is the better answer. And also phrase it in the form of a question, as cliche as it is. That will cost you if you don't. And it's not natural. It's not intuitive to do that.
Right. So it's really watching the show with your ballpoint pen and actually simulating as if you're a contestant in that moment.
Yes, it's very annoying for everyone else. So probably watch in private.
All right, good to know. So just a reminder, of anyone who's watching live and have any questions for Vince, you can send them to us by email at aoc@mcgill.ca, and we'll try to get them over to Vince before we go off the air. So let me sort of get back to our chronological perspective here. So now the big day's arrived. You've flown to LA, you're in sunny California, or maybe it's raining and you're dodging landslides. You get to Sony Picture Studios, the Alex Trebek stage. So what happens first? You just kind of show up and I'm here.
Well, there's a lot of orientation. They run a very tight ship. So COVID regulations, how to behave on the studio. You just can't wander off. And then gameplay, stuff we already know as fans, but they legally, they have to tell us, go through all the rules in case certain exceptional situations happen, like a tie. But then it's typical to any TV show, I would imagine, hair, makeup, wardrobe. And we do get a practice round, a practice game, so they can view us on camera with the lights, with the makeup, and see how everything is going. And we get a chance to test the buzzer and stuff like that.
So these are questions that they've just a whole other set of questions that they've developed just to practice with. They let you guys practice.
Apparently so. I have a few theories, but yes, it's really to give everyone a chance to buzz in and try things out. Yes.
Right. So do you get to spend a lot of time with the other contestants before the taping? And what is that like? Are people sort of friendly, or is it a very sort of combative spirit from the moment you get there?
Well, we do spend quite a lot of time. So all that prep I just mentioned, we do together. But we even, when the games are on and you're not playing, we're all together as well, watching on the TV. So that's probably where we bonded the most. I was there for 2 days. I didn't actually film the first day I was called. So I got to see two different groups of contestants. And the first group, I would say, was very sociable, very friendly. They stayed, even after they'd played their games, they would stay and watch and cheer the others. So that was great. And on the second day, they were a little bit more conservative, still very friendly, but maybe a little more focused on their bubble, a little more reserved, but still equally friendly and supportive. I wouldn't say there was anybody who was combative or tried to psych us out or anything like that.
Right. Now, what about the host, Ken Jennings? I know he's regarded by many as the greatest Jeopardy champion of all time. And he comes across on screen as just a genuinely nice guy who really wants every contestant to succeed. Did you get to interact much with him off air? And is that really what he's like in real life?
That really is what he's like. That you summed it up perfectly. He does seem to be rooting for everyone. He just wants a good game. He's less interested in who's going to win. We don't get to spend that much time with him because of conflict of interest. But he does come out before the practice games. He welcomes us. He gives us some pointers. And then what you see on TV is pretty much what we get. Those conversations after the first commercial and at the end. Those are actually taped as well. They're not always shared on YouTube or on TV, but we do spend time filming those as well. But he is very nice, obviously brilliant, and supportive. When I was missing a lot of questions, you could tell he was rooting for me. He was rooting for me to come back. At least in my head, he was rooting for me. Maybe he wasn't, but he certainly gave that impression. And someone like him who could answer all of the questions, you might guess, oh, he's kind of laughing at you. No, it's the opposite. He really wants you to get them.
Right. And in fact, we just received a question from one of our audience members, Michael Mandel, who just asked that very same question. Was Ken Jennings a pleasant guy? Was he friendly? Was he supportive? So I think you've answered that well. So thank you, Michael, for the question. I guess we're thinking along the same lines. I'm curious about your actual appearance itself and once the cameras are rolling for real. So just to provide some context for people who may not know, a lot of people watch Jeopardy. The average nightly audience, I think, is 9.2 million viewers in North America, which makes Jeopardy the single most watched show on television that's not a sporting event. So knowing all of that, which I'm sure you did before you went live, what was going through your mind once the game got started, and how did you manage to stay so calm, knowing that so many people would be watching your correct answers and your mistakes? Because you looked very calm.
Well, it was all a facade because I wasn't that calm. I certainly was not thinking of 9 million, although yes, I was aware of that number. There are people in the audience. It's quite a small and intimate set, so they're quite close as well. That made me more nervous than the practice games for sure. But really, there's so much happening on the board and with the game, you don't have time to think of that. When I did have time, such as during a daily double or a final Jeopardy, that's when I was in trouble. I missed probably definitely more than I made in that type of question partly because of the time to think. You really shouldn't think. You should just go on muscle memory. Right.
So I know we see the final 30-minute show, which is like 22 minutes and 8 minutes of commercials for drugs, I guess, medicines. So I'm just curious, are the games shot in one sequence and essentially played back to us as they happen? Or what we're seeing as an audience is like a very highly edited version of what actually took place?
What you see is very close to what's actually shot. It's all in sequence. Occasionally, they reshoot certain things that have no impact on the game. So let's say Ken walks out and does an introduction and messes up his line a little bit. He'll reshoot that later, or if a contestant does the same thing or coughs, that might be reshot as well. But it doesn't affect the game. The game will go on, and then after the game is over or during the commercial break, they'll reshoot that. Sometimes there are technical glitches. A clue might be revealed, that the wrong clue might be revealed, and they have to replace that. So these are all things done in commercial breaks. So a shooting of an episode takes about an hour, maybe a little less. Similar to the television show with just longer commercial breaks.
And if you mess up a question, they're not reshooting that. That's part of the game, I guess.
I've asked, and the answer is no.
Great. So let me ask you about that first game. You went in against a very strong returning champion who I think had knocked off a repeat champion, and obviously was a very strong player. Did you go in sort of with any expectations that you might actually win at least one match?
Well, the three-time champion who Katie Palumbo had beaten was a very highly touted quizzing champion. and he was in the first filming day with me, and we were all quite intimidated by him. And he had 3 fantastic games. So I thought I would have to play him. And I don't back down from a challenge, but you lower your expectations, let's say. Katie played a brilliant game. So I knew it wouldn't be easy. But that said, I thought I had a chance. Whereas maybe against Yogesh, I had no chance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So again, if anyone's watching live and you have any questions for Vince, you can send them to us by email at aoc@mcgill.ca. You were introduced on the show as a risk manager, and it strikes me that risk and risk tolerance would play a big role in any contestant's strategy on Jeopardy. Whether or not to take a guess at an answer when you're not sure if it's right, and of course, how much to wager on a daily double. So can you talk a little bit about the role that risk played in your games, and did being a professional risk manager make you a more cautious or more aggressive player?
Again, it comes down to if I had time to think about things like that. So I would say for the final bets, I was conservative. Now that I look back at, I had a lead at that point. I probably should have bet less then. So adrenaline and everything just kind of dominated. So it's all a blur. I can't really say I called on risk management skills at the time, but hopefully inherently there was some.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very interesting. So before we sort of jump to the sort of after the appearance questions, I did want to ask you if there was any one thing, when you look back at your experience, that surprised you most about the whole filming experience, or at least something you can share with us without violating a non-disclosure agreement, something that we wouldn't necessarily know as home viewers.
Well, the buzzing was completely new. So what you don't see on TV, so the big board with all the questions, that actually is what we're looking at too. I thought we might have like a small teleprompter closer to us because it's quite far away. So you need good vision to see those questions. But around the perimeter of that board are white lights. And there's a technician who's waiting for Ken to finish the question. And then after a little pause, he lights up the board. When the lights go on, the buzzers are open. If you buzz before those lights are on, you're locked out for half a second or something. So it's very unlikely you'll get it. And that's why you keep buzzing, even if you're locked out, in case you get unlocked. But if you actually wait for the lights to light up, you're probably not going to be first because everyone is buzzing every question. That's the other thing. You think, oh, why doesn't he answer? Doesn't he know that? Yeah, he knows it, but he's just been outbuzzed or she's just been outbuzzed. So there are pretty much 2 people are answering or 3 answering every question. And then so given that, so you're waiting for the lights, but if you really want to be first, you have to anticipate the lights and just go on feel and the rhythm of the voice, which is another reason to watch the show and watch both hosts. Get to know the rhythm. Ken Jennings said he did this with Alex Trebek. Get to know the rhythm of the questions and when the buzzer lights up, see what the gap is. And when you're practicing, see if you can kind of anticipate, even though you don't see the lights yourself.
And I was reading that is actually a change that they brought to the show, because back in the older days, certainly in the Alex Trebek days, I think you were able to buzz in at any point while he was reading the question and he would just stop and you would have to answer without knowing the full question. So I guess that's a change that they brought on since then. Wow. If my calculations are right, your total winnings over the 2 days, including your second place finish on day 2, amount to $15,000 US, which is pretty impressive. So I guess the question I have is, do you have any plans yet for how you're going to spend the money? And would that include a fancy dinner with your favorite webcast host or not?
I'm certainly more than happy to take you for dinner, Derek. But the actual totals were a bit on the low side. It's a below average total. I think the average is more 20 to 22, but you can't miss a daily double and a final and expect to make that. But I'm still very grateful. I haven't been paid yet, but assuming when I do, it's going into a separate account. And because Jeopardy was my lifelong dream, I'm putting this in a dedicated account to finance the next dream, whatever it is. So I'm happy to take you for dinner, but it'll be from a different account. Well,
if we go for dinner, we'll split the bill. How's that? But thanks for the offer. So since the shows aired last week, I know your appearances have generated quite a lot of buzz, certainly on the McGill campus and across Montreal, including a front page article in today's Montreal Gazette. So I'm curious what your life has been like this last week, and is it still safe for you to walk the streets of Brossard without a disguise?
Oh, please. In Brossard, it's mostly francophone, so like my neighbor knows, and that's about it. My churches know, and Ganawake was probably the most uh, representative or watching in the biggest numbers, because apparently when my first episode was on, one person saw it, put it on the Facebook chat room, and everyone started to watch. Certainly the second night was well watched. So maybe in Ganawake someone mightn't recognize me, but that's about it, and that's perfectly fine.
We'll have to get you a fake mustache over the real one when you go out there. But one thing I did notice on social media was some of your former teachers, I guess elementary, high school teachers perhaps, reaching out to you to offer their congratulations. And I'm wondering, that must be neat, or maybe vindicating, depending on what your grades like were back then. So what has that experience been like, hearing from old teachers who knew you back then?
It was great because we lost touch. When I went to school, there was no internet or email, so this was a nice way to touch base. They're very supportive. It's very reassuring to know that they actually remember me. I was kind of a good student, but still, it's been X years since, so it was very nice to hear from them. I'm actually going to see one of them hopefully next week.
Okay, so we've had a couple of questions that have come in. We have a little bit of time left, so if you are watching and want to send in a question by email, you can do it at aoc@mcgill.ca. Robin Burkett's asking a question, which was on my list too. I was going to get to it, but I'll read you her question. She was wondering how your education at McGill may have helped you in your Jeopardy journey.
Well, at McGill, I took chemical engineering, both a bachelor's and master's. So certainly anything science or engineering or technical related is thanks to McGill. In fact, when I answered one question, polymer instead of protein, I'm sure there were a lot of engineers who were kind of cheering that, because that's about as engineering as you can get. And also my music background is because of McGill. I completed the conservatory program here, to collegial 2 in piano. And also this whole experience was because of my mother, who was a continuing studies graduate. She got her 2 diplomas in her 40s, and she actually established a scholarship that's fully funded now. So, and I'm hopefully going to join the board of continuing studies this month with any luck. So McGill has always been a part of my life, and I think Jeopardy really is, in my case at least, a reflection of my life's experiences, and McGill is certainly a major part of that. So thank you for that question.
Great. One more question has come in. I think you can answer it. I'm not sure, but this came to us from Susie Chardo. She's asking if contestants have to pay for their own expenses to get to Los Angeles.
Yes, you do. So, back in the day, you remember seeing at the end of shows, flights provided by or hotel accommodations provided by. That hasn't happened in 10 years or so. So they've stopped that. The exception would be, so if you're the last film to show, last game to film, sorry, on that day, and you'd have to come back. Now, they don't shoot every day. You could have to come back, 2 weeks later. They will pay for the flight to come back. Well, then once you arrive again in LA, the expenses are on you. So really, you do have to, at least for a Canadian, I had to make sure I got second place, or I'd lose money on this deal. In fact, one of the questions after the game, after the credits, Ken asked, well, what are you going to do with your winnings? And I said, since I won so little that barely covered enough for my flight from Canada, I think I'm going to treat myself to a cab back to the airport rather than an Uber. And you can actually see him laugh, but that will never see the light of day, because they don't like to advertise that they don't cover travel expenses.
Geez, and now we've got millions watching this webcast, and the secret. But well, that's interesting. And yeah, but at least every contestant gets, I think, at least $1,000. And I was reading, someone actually, I was doing some Googling, and somebody online had asked, what if you end up on the show in negative territory, as it happens from time to time? do you owe that money to the show? And I think the answer is no. In fact, you get the $1,000 for a third place finish, right?
That's correct. That actually happened on the second show, and yes, he did still receive his $1,000.
Right. So we're, I guess, almost out of time, or I'm almost out of my questions. I did have a couple of final questions to ask you. So we mentioned earlier how popular Jeopardy is, and in fact, I Googled this and discovered that it's the second longest running game show in the history of American television. So I'm wondering, now that you've gone through the Jeopardy experience as a contestant and as a champion, why do you think the show has been so popular for so long?
I think it's because of its appeal to families. People watch it, many generations will watch together with your parents or your grandparents. And we all love screaming the answers at the TV. And no matter what, it's such a broad set of categories that there's going to be a few that you're good at. And it really is tailored for that play along experience, and to give you the sense that yes, I could play on this game too, and I'm proof of that. So, and it's so well structured. They really know what they're doing. It's such a professional, and they're very friendly as well, which you might not expect. But it's just a great group of people, and I think the appeal is it's a family show, strange as it seems.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I like you, I know I remember watching it back in the 80s with my dad. And, today I've got two teenage girls, and, it's a big event when we can all get our schedules aligned to sit down and watch Jeopardy, and to see that, like you said, the delight in their eyes and their voices when they get an answer right, which is happening more and more often, and sometimes more than me. It's very vindicating and great to see that people can sort of play along. Oh, I did get another question has just come in, so maybe I'll just ask it to you before we wrap up. This one came to us from Cynthia Gordon. Interesting. She's asking if the $15,000 US you want, she's wondering about the tax implications. And I guess as a Canadian citizen, is that different from a US citizen?
Yes, there are. Hi, Cynthia. I actually know Cynthia personally. We worked together on the scholarship. Yes, there are definitely tax implications. You sign a withholding tax form. So there will be, I think it's 30% taken off. But my understanding is, I haven't found my taxes yet, but because it is considered a winning, that I can eventually claim some, if not all of it back. And the process will take maybe 1 or 2 years, but eventually the money will come back.
Okay, the questions are starting to come in now. So another one has just come in from Catherine Snow. We sort of touched on this, but she's asking, how has Jeopardy changed your life? Have you received any job offers or invitations to events that maybe you wouldn't have received before?
Well, thank you for the question. The response has been so much more than I had expected. I mean, I was only on for two nights, and when Bill Brownstein contacted me, he actually mentioned a Jeopardy event. It was Amy Schneider giving a Zoom lecture at the Cumming Center, and I'd not even heard of it. And by throwing his name around, sorry, Bill, I got a last minute ticket and actually asked her a question at the event. So that was certainly something. I've gotten to know through online groups other Jeopardy contestants, and it really is quite a community. So that's another big benefit of going on the show. You become a part of this very quirky and interesting community. But otherwise, no, nothing has really changed. Professionally, I don't think anything will change. But I'm totally open. So if anyone's hiring, yes.
Right. Not only a two-time McGill graduate, but a Jeopardy champion. That's quite the CV. So before I let you go, I know we spoke obviously before we went live, but one thing which I didn't tell you was that I might throw a question out at you to test the skills and see how good you are at trivia for real. So I mentioned earlier, in one of my earlier questions, Jeopardy being the second longest running game show in the history of American television. So let me ask a trivia question to you, not to put you on the spot. The category is game shows. The question is, what is the longest running game show in American history?
We're talking U.S. history?
Yes.
Oh, game show of all? Gosh, I'm going to try Price is Right, but I don't know. I'll guess Price. What is Price is Right? The Price is Right.
You are right. So I tried to stump the Jeopardy champion, but I couldn't. We did get, sorry, the questions are coming in. So let me just see what else. We've got a couple more questions that have come in. We just got one from Judy Gardosh Bergman. There's a couple of questions in here. Let me just run through them. Do you keep in touch with other Canadian winners?
Canadian winners. I'm too embarrassed to contact any of those big winners, like Matea or Ray Lalonde. But no, I've not yet been in contact with any of them. Maybe we'll run into one another in one of these Jeopardy contestant groups. But so far, no. They swim in much ritzier ponds than I do.
And a second question from Judy. Obviously, she's a big fan of the show. She's wondering if you can explain the large number of champions who have lasted for many episodes. That currently seems to be a trend that we're seeing on Jeopardy. These sort of many day repeat champions.
That's interesting because this is where the NDA might come in. There are a few theories. I mean, some of them, the pool has expanded. The contestant pool has expanded. For COVID certainly increased viewership, and so did Amy Schneider's presence. I would say the last million were largely due to her. So that's one reason, a more diverse pool. And I would say the online community, the resources available to become a quizzer in general, online or through in-person leagues, are much more developed and I would say professional. Like they really prepare you for Jeopardy more. They know what the buzzer is like. They simulate if Jeopardy is the target. So the preparation now is just like I'm the exception, I think, because I just played Sporkle at home. But if you really wanted to get out there and prepare, this could be, the equivalent of golf for you. This could be what you do every weekend. This could be your life. And that's what you're seeing more. What they don't want you to know or what they don't advertise so much. So let's say the current champion, Troy Meyer, who's brilliant, and I imagine he's going to win 20 or 30 games. He's won the Learning League apparently 4 times. So he's not going there as some music executive off the street. He's going there with a big resume, as Yogesh Raut did, the fellow the 3-time champion who was a few games before me. So they're coming in with quite a resume. And I'm not sure if that was true 10 or 20 years back. See, like James Holzhauer is another one of these kind of professional quizzers. You can make a living off it potentially if you're at that elite level like those two are. So I think the illusion or they want you to think that you can just kind of, that person who, the receptionist at the office who reads a lot could get onto Jeopardy. That still happens, but I think it's becoming more and more, these are really well-practiced quizzers.
So professional Jeopardy players in some ways.
Such as is. Jeopardy is still by far the largest payoff for any of them. This is kind of still considered the pinnacle. In terms of difficulty, maybe not. But in terms of exposure, there's nothing like it. So everyone wants to get on Jeopardy. And of course, the money attracts the best.
And I guess as a returning champion, there must be an inherent advantage when you're on for let's say a second show and a third show, competing against people that are sort of dealing with all of the kind of anxieties and nerves and unfamiliarity with the buzzer that you experienced as a first-time champion. That must must give some edge to a champion to repeat, correct?
Definitely. I think most champions would say, Amy said this the other night, the first game was the most difficult because of the novelty of everything. But I'd also say in my case, I told you I shot on, or I was there for 2 days, even though I didn't play the first day. I got to practice twice. Not everyone gets to practice twice. Only 2 out of 12 got to practice twice. And that was a huge advantage for me because I actually figured out that the buzzer was kind of stuck in the console. I pulled out the cord and suddenly it was a lot easier to buzz. So I was able to buzz in the game where I was getting locked out in practice. So all these little things, which are all on the line somewhere, I'm sure by other people, they all factor in. But the nerves, the nerves are a lot. Yes. Yeah, may I say one tip? Then another tip for gameplay: get over your stage fright or your nerves now. If you're an introvert like me and you don't like the idea of 9 million people watching will terrify you, it would be a real shame to do all this practice and then just freeze while the cameras are on. So do something now to get over it. One person join an improv group or public speaking, or join a theater group, something in front of actual people, not just virtual people. Get over the stage fright now, because that would be such a shame. It's so much work. Don't lose it because of stage fright.
Right. You should have seen the first couple of webcasts I did for McGill. No, never mind. No, that's a very good tip.
I'll look for them now, though. Okay.
I think they were okay. I'm very conscientious of your time. Any last minute sort of final tips you might want to share with people? I know you've provided so many great information. If there's any one or two things people may want to think about as they begin the audition process, what would you want to leave them with, or leave us with?
Well, we've talked a lot about the quizzing portion, like the online test and the studying. So that's fine. People pretty much have a good idea of how to do that. But the other half, because as Canadians, yes, we were shut out. But some of the contestants, the US contestants, it took them 15 years, and they were getting to the audition stage and having to do 5 or 6 auditions. So if you are lucky enough to get to that stage, my best advice would be think of it, treat it as a job interview. Wear what you would to a job interview. Present yourself like a job interview. Get those stories ready that you're able to, to get in there at the drop of a hat to make yourself sound interesting. Prepare that all in advance and really, try to get this job. It's a job that they want. It's a business, right? They're making money off of you. So you have to be, able to make them that money, such as it is. They want people to root for you. So you have to make yourself find that sector that appeals to you and kind of present yourself in the best possible way.
Wow, wonderful. Well, this has been wonderful, Vince. And thank you so much again. It does, I guess, wrap up the time we do have today. Before we bring the webcast to a close, I'd like to remind you that this video will be available at this very same link soon after our recording ends. So feel free to share it with others who may not have been able to tune in live. Of course, I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to our special guest, two-time McGill graduate, Vince Bacani, for taking the time to join us today and providing us with a lot of great details and the inside scoop on what it's like to compete on and win on America's most popular game show. Please continue to stay tuned to your McGill email and social media feeds over the coming weeks as we continue to share news about our exciting online and in-person programming. Don't forget, we're just a few weeks away from the next edition of McGill 24, our annual 24-hour fundraising event in support of the university's students, professors, and researchers. We're counting on everybody out there for their support on that day. Until then, please be well and stay safe. Thank you.